Sometimes the hardest part of growing older isn't what you've lost, it's knowing you can't get it back. Arthur Brennan understood that better than most after raising his son alone for 40 years. At 76, he bought 20 acres in Vermont, hoping for some quiet before the end. The property came with a strange note tucked in the paperwork. "Never check the well." He laughed it off. Then his son, Stephen, showed up, 49 and hurting from his own failed marriage, and couldn't let those words go. They found the old well hidden under twisted roots and moss. What Stephen pulled up wasn't dangerous. It was something that would change both their lives. But what could be down there that someone desperately wanted to stay hidden? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from, and if this touches you, subscribe. Tomorrow we have something special waiting. The truck's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound besides wind moving through the maples. Arthur Brennan sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands still gripping the rim, though he'd already turned off the ignition. Through the dusty windshield, his new property stretched out before him. 20 acres of mixed hardwood forest, most of it thick with undergrowth that hadn't seen a clearing saw in decades. The cabin sat 50 yards up a gentle rise, its cedar shingles silvered with age, one shutter hanging crooked. 76 years on this earth, and this was what he had to show for it. A piece of land nobody else wanted, and a body that reminded him every morning he was living on borrowed time. He climbed out slowly, feeling the stiffness in his lower back. September in Vermont meant the leaves were just starting to turn, splashes of orange and red interrupting the green canopy. The air smelled like pine sap and earth, nothing like the diesel and sawdust that had filled his lungs for 40 years on construction sites. The real estate agent had called it a rustic opportunity. Arthur called it a place to die quietly, though he hadn't said that part out loud. He'd spent his whole life building things for other people. Framed houses from Virginia to Maine, poured foundations, raised barns, fitted trimwork in mansions he could never afford. His hands were thick with calluses, fingers slightly bent from breaks that hadn't set quite right. Those hands had also braided his son's hair for school pictures, packed lunches, signed permission slips, held Stephen's shoulder at his mother's funeral. That was 1984. Stephen had been 9 years old, small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes and quiet way of watching the world. Caroline had been sick for 8 months before the cancer finally took her. Those months had hollowed Arthur out, left him someone he didn't quite recognize. A man alone with a boy who needed more than he knew how to give. But he'd tried. God knows he'd tried. The cabin door stuck when he pushed it, wood swollen from humidity. Inside smelled like mildew and mouse droppings. One large room with a kitchen area along the back wall, a wood stove in the corner, and a ladder leading up to a sleeping loft. Windows on 3 sides, all of them intact. The floor was pine planks, solid under his boots despite the dust. He'd brought supplies in the truck bed, a Coleman stove, sleeping bag, cooler with food for a week, cleaning materials, basic tools. The plan was simple. Get the place livable, settle in, figure out what came next, if anything came next at all. The property documents were in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. He'd looked through them a dozen times during the drive up from Connecticut, mostly to convince himself this wasn't some elaborate mistake. The deed, the survey map, the title insurance, the disclosure forms, everything legal and proper. And then there was the note. He pulled it out now, unfolding the yellowed paper carefully. The handwriting was firm, slightly slanted, written in blue ink that had faded to gray in places. Never check the well, that was all it said. No signature, no date, no explanation. The real estate agent had laughed when Arthur asked about it. Old Yankee superstition probably, she'd said. These hill properties, people get peculiar ideas. The well's been capped for safety anyway. Nothing to worry about. Arthur had laughed too, because what else do you do with something so strange? But now, standing in the cabin with late afternoon light slanting through dirty windows, the note felt different, heavier somehow. He tucked it back in the envelope and started unloading the truck. The work felt good. Physical labor always had. He swept out the cabin, scrubbed the kitchen counter, checked the integrity of the loft ladder. The previous owners had left some furniture, a table with 2 chairs, a metal bed frame, shelves along one wall. Basic but functional. By the time he got the wood stove going and heated up a can of soup, darkness had settled over the forest. The silence was profound. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no television murmur from another room. Just wind in the trees and the occasional call of an owl. He ate, standing at the window, looking out at nothing he could see. Thinking about Stephen. His son was 49 now, living outside Boston, working in insurance. A good job, steady. Stephen had called last month to tell him about the separation. His voice on the phone had been flat, carefully controlled. "It's mutual," he'd said. "We just want different things." Arthur had responded the way he always did. Steady, practical, supportive in a way that didn't require too many words. "You need anything, you let me know." What he hadn't said: "I know how it feels to watch your life fall apart. I know what it's like to be alone." They'd never been good at talking, not really. Arthur had raised Stephen with routines and reliability instead of conversations. Dinner at 6, homework before television, church on Sundays. He'd shown up to every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game. But he'd never learned how to talk about feelings, about grief, about the weight they both carried. Caroline would have known what to say. She'd been the one who could draw Stephen out, make him laugh, get him to share what was troubling him. After she died, that light just went out, and neither of them knew how to turn it back on. Arthur finished his soup and washed the bowl in cold water from the hand pump at the sink. The real estate agent had mentioned the well was still functional, just not the primary water source anymore. A newer drilled well with an electric pump served the cabin, though he'd need to get the power turned on. He climbed up to the loft with his sleeping bag and stretched out on the bare mattress, listening to the cabin settle around him. His body ached in the familiar ways: lower back, right shoulder, both knees. The inventory of a working man's life. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, he dreamed of Caroline in their first apartment, dancing in the kitchen to a radio that only picked up one station clearly. She'd been 23, pregnant with Stephen, still convinced life would be everything they hoped for. He woke to grey dawn light and the sound of rain on the roof. The cabin felt colder, damp, seeping through the walls. He got the wood stove going again, made coffee on the Coleman, and sat at the table with the property survey map spread out before him. The well was marked clearly, a small circle with a W inside it, located about 30 yards southeast of the cabin. According to the notes, it was a hand-dug stone well, probably built in the late 1800s when the property was first settled. "Never check the well." Arthur traced the marking with one finger, wondering what kind of person leaves a note like that, wondering what they'd seen or done or feared. Outside, rain dripped from the eaves, and the forest looked grey-green through the mist. He thought about going to find the well just to see it, but something held him back. Not fear exactly, more like respect for a warning someone had cared enough to write down. His phone buzzed, rare signal this deep in the hills. A text from Stephen. "How's the new place? Thinking I might drive up this weekend if you're around?" Arthur stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Come anytime. Plenty of room." He hit send and wondered if his son was looking for the same thing he was. A place to rest. A place to figure out what comes after everything falls apart. Stephen's car appeared Friday afternoon. A grey sedan coated in road dust, moving slowly up the dirt track that passed for a driveway. Arthur was splitting kindling near the woodshed when he heard the engine. He set down the hatchet and wiped his hands on his jeans, watching his son navigate around the deeper ruts. The car door opened, and Stephen unfolded himself from the driver's seat. He'd lost weight since Arthur had seen him last Christmas. His face looked thinner, older somehow, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wore a fleece jacket over a button-down shirt, jeans that looked too loose at the waist. "Found it okay?" Arthur called. "GPS quit about 2 miles back." Stephen grabbed a duffel bag from the back seat. "Had to go old school with your directions." They met halfway between the car and the cabin, and Arthur pulled his son into a brief hug. Stephen felt fragile in his arms, all angles and tension. "You eating enough?" "I'm fine, Dad. Stephen stepped back, managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Place looks good, peaceful. It's quiet anyway. Arthur led him toward the cabin. Got the wood stove working, but no electricity yet. Power company's coming Monday. Roughing it, like when we went camping. Except the bears are probably bigger up here. Inside, Stephen set his bag by the door and looked around. His gaze moved across the simple room, the bare walls, the minimal furniture. How long you planning to stay?
Haven't decided.
Through winter, at least. Arthur filled the kettle at the hand pump.
Coffee?
Sure. They settled at the table with mugs of instant coffee, the awkward silence of two people who love each other but don't know what to say. Rain had started again, light and steady against the windows. How's Alison? Arthur asked. She's good. We're being civil about everything. Stephen wrapped both hands around his mug. Dividing up the furniture next week. It's all very mature and reasonable. The way he said it made it clear how much it hurt. I'm sorry, son. Stephen nodded, staring into his coffee. Yeah, me too. Arthur wanted to say something useful, something comforting, but the words wouldn't come. He'd never been good at this part. Instead, he got up and retrieved the manila envelope from the shelf. Something I wanted to show you. Probably nothing, but it's strange enough. He handed Stephen the note. His son unfolded it, read the single line, looked up with raised eyebrows. Never checked the well. Came with the property papers. Real estate agent said it was probably just some old superstition. That's it? No explanation? That's it. Arthur sat back down. I've been thinking about it since I got here. Who writes something like that? Stephen read the note again, turning it over to check the blank back. When was this written? No date. Paper looks old, though. Decades, maybe. And there's actually a well on the property. Marked on the survey map. Southeast of here, not far. Something shifted in Stephen's expression. A spark of interest or curiosity or something else Arthur couldn't quite name. His son leaned forward. Have you looked for it? Not yet. Been focused on getting the cabin sorted. Can we go find it? Arthur hesitated. The intensity in Stephen's voice caught him off guard. It's raining. I don't mind. Stephen was already standing, folding the note carefully and putting it in his pocket. Come on, Dad, aren't you curious? Truth was, Arthur had been curious since the moment he'd read those 4 words. But he'd also felt something else. A sense that some warnings should be heeded, even strange ones left by strangers. Still, his son was looking at him with more energy than he'd shown since arriving, and Arthur wasn't about to shut that down. Let me get the survey map. They pulled on jackets and headed out into the drizzle. Arthur carried the map in a plastic sleeve, checking their orientation against the cabin's position. Southeast meant following the tree line past a stand of old-growth hemlock, then into thicker undergrowth. Stephen walked ahead, pushing through branches with his hands, breathing hard but not slowing down. Arthur followed, wondering at his son's sudden determination. It wasn't like him. Stephen had always been measured, careful, the kind of person who thought things through before acting. Watch for stones, Arthur called. Old wells usually have a stone border, even if they're capped. They moved deeper into the forest, leaves slick underfoot, rain dripping from every surface. The undergrowth grew dense, saplings and brush that hadn't been cleared in years. Arthur was about to suggest they turn back and try again when the weather cleared, but Stephen had stopped ahead. Dad, look at this. Arthur pushed through to stand beside his son. Stephen was pointing at the ground, where a line of stones emerged from beneath decades of leaf litter and moss. Each stone was roughly the size of a dinner plate, flat-topped, placed deliberately. It's a path, Stephen said quietly. They followed the stones, brushing aside leaves and ferns. The path curved gently through the trees, leading them deeper into an area where the canopy was thicker, the light dimmer. Arthur felt his pulse quicken. This was intentional, crafted. Someone had laid these stones with purpose. The path ended at a circular clearing, maybe 15 feet across. And in the center, almost completely hidden by twisted roots and moss, was the well. It was smaller than Arthur had imagined, maybe 4 feet in diameter, built from stacked stones that had settled and shifted over time. Part of the structure had collapsed inward. Thick roots from a nearby maple had grown over and around it, creating a kind of natural cage. Moss covered everything, deep green and velvet soft. Stephen approached slowly, like someone drawn to something they can't explain. He knelt beside the well, pulling away handfuls of moss and dead leaves. "Help me clear this. Stephen, we should probably—" "Please, Dad." The word was quiet but urgent, and Arthur heard something beneath it. Desperation, maybe, or need. His son needed this for reasons Arthur didn't understand, but could feel. He knelt beside Stephen, and together they began clearing away years of forest growth. The work was slow, careful. The stones were solid despite their age, fitted together with skill. Someone had built this to last. After 20 minutes, they'd cleared enough to see down into the darkness. Stephen pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it into the well. The beam caught on stone walls, disappearing into black water about 15 feet down. But there was something else, something floating near the surface that gleamed dully in the light. Metal, a container of some kind. Stephen looked at Arthur, rain streaming down both their faces. "There's something down there. Could be anything. Trash, old tools." The note said never check the well. Stephen's voice was tight. "Why would someone warn about trash?" Arthur didn't have an answer. They both stared into the darkness, at the mysterious object just visible below. "I need to know what it is," Stephen said. He stopped, swallowed hard. "I just need to know." Arthur saw it then in his son's face. The same look he'd seen in the mirror after Caroline died. The look of someone drowning who's just spotted something to hold on to, even if it's only debris floating past. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll come back tomorrow with rope and a hook. Do this properly." Stephen nodded, still staring down into the well. "Thank you." They stayed there for another moment, rain falling around them before heading back to the cabin. Neither of them noticed that they'd left the note in Stephen's jacket pocket, or that the words, "Never check the well," were already becoming less a warning and more a challenge they couldn't ignore. They returned to the well at first light with 50 feet of climbing rope, a grappling hook Arthur had found in the shed, and a canvas tarp to lay their findings on. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the forest dripping and fragrant with wet earth. Stephen had barely slept. Arthur had heard him moving around downstairs, pacing, probably unable to settle. When Arthur climbed down from the loft at dawn, his son was already dressed, coffee made, clearly impatient to get started. Now Stephen held the rope while Arthur lowered the hook carefully into the well, playing out line until he felt it hit bottom. The water couldn't be more than a foot deep, mostly just collected rainwater over the years. "Got it," Arthur said, feeling the hook catch on something solid. He pulled up slowly, the rope dripping, until the metal container emerged into daylight. It was a box, roughly the size of a shoebox, made of steel and completely sealed with rust. Decades of submersion had oxidized it to a deep orange-brown, but the metal had held. Someone had wrapped it carefully in what looked like rubber inner tubing before the rust had claimed it. They carried it back to the cabin and set it on the table. Stephen found a screwdriver and worked at the edges while Arthur boiled water for coffee. The seal broke with a grinding sound, and the lid lifted. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic sheeting still intact, was a stack of letters tied with disintegrating twine. Stephen's hands shook slightly as he lifted them out. The plastic crinkled, brittle with age but still functional. Beneath it the letters looked pristine, the paper cream-colored, the handwriting clear and careful. Arthur set down 2 mugs of coffee and pulled his chair closer. "What's the date on the first one?" Stephen unfolded the top letter carefully. "March 15th, 1983. He scanned the first few lines, then began reading aloud. "Dear whoever finds this, I suppose that's a strange way to start a letter. I don't know who you are or when you're reading this. Maybe no one ever will. But I need to write to someone, even if that someone is just the future, just the possibility of being heard." Stephen paused, glanced at his father, then continued. "My name is Geneva. I'm 31 years old, and I've lived on this land for 2 years with my husband Lawrence. We came here to start over, to build something good away from the noise of the world. That was the plan anyway, but plans have a way of changing, don't they? Lawrence is different here than he was in the city, quieter, more distant. Some days he barely speaks at all. I tell myself it's just adjustment, that we both need time. But tonight he's down at the tavern in town again, and I'm here alone, and I'm starting to wonder if I've made a terrible mistake." Stephen stopped reading, his voice catching slightly. Arthur waited, giving him space. "There's more," Stephen said. "Several pages. She talks about their first year here, building onto the cabin, trying to make a garden. She sounds hopeful but worried, like she's trying to convince herself everything will be okay." "Keep reading," Arthur said quietly. They spent the next hour going through the letters one by one. Geneva's voice emerged from the pages, thoughtful, honest, increasingly sad. She wrote about Lawrence's drinking, about arguments that ended in silence, about the growing distance between them. She described the land in careful detail, where she'd planted apple trees, where the deer came through at dawn, where she'd found wild strawberries. By the 10th letter, dated August 1983, the tone had shifted. "I've decided to make the well my confidant," Stephen read. "It sounds foolish, I know, but I can't keep these thoughts locked inside, and I have no one else to tell them to. Lawrence doesn't want to hear about my feelings. Mrs. Templeton means well, but she's 83 and has enough concerns of her own. So I'm putting my words here, in this well that's held water for generations. Maybe someday someone will find them. Maybe they'll understand what it's like to love someone who's slowly disappearing." Stephen set the letter down and rubbed his eyes. Arthur noticed they were damp. "You okay, son?" "Yeah," Stephen's voice was rough. "It's just the way she writes about him leaving while he's still there. I understand that. I lived it." Arthur wanted to reach across the table, put his hand on Stephen's shoulder, say something about how he'd been there too after Caroline died. How he'd stayed physically present but emotionally absent for years, while his son grew up needing more than just a roof and regular meals. Instead, he said, "Let's see what else is in the box." Beneath the letters was a small cloth bundle. Stephen unwrapped it carefully, revealing a stack of photographs. The first showed a young woman standing in front of the cabin, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. She had long, dark hair pulled back in a braid, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, smiling but with something careful in her expression. "That's got to be Geneva," Arthur said. The next photo showed her with a man, presumably Lawrence. He was tall and bearded, holding an axe, standing beside a stack of firewood. He wasn't smiling. The photo had been taken from a distance, as if Geneva had captured him without him knowing. More photographs followed, documenting their life on the property. The garden in various stages, the cabin with new windows, a truck parked where Stephen's car now sat. And in each successive photo, Geneva looked thinner, more tired, less likely to smile. The final photographs in the stack showed the property in winter, snow covering everything. Lawrence appeared in only one of these, barely visible through a window, and even then, he looked like he was already leaving. Stephen gathered the photos and letters together carefully. "She put these here on purpose. She wanted someone to know what happened. We don't know what happened yet," Arthur pointed out. "Just that they were struggling. There's got to be more in the well. This box was just floating near the top. What if there's more deeper down?" Arthur had been thinking the same thing. "We'd need better equipment. A longer rope, a stronger hook, maybe a flashlight we can lower down to see what else is there. Can we go to town? Get supplies?" Arthur nodded. "Hardware store should have what we need." "But Stephen—" He waited until his son met his eyes. "Why does this matter so much to you?" Stephen was quiet for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge of one photograph. Because she felt alone. Because her husband was there but not there. Because she needed to be heard and had no one to listen. He looked up. "Because I know exactly how that feels." They drove into town that afternoon, a 20-minute trip down winding roads to a village called Fairhaven. The hardware store was on Main Street, sandwiched between a diner and a feed supply shop. Arthur bought a waterproof flashlight, 100 feet of nylon rope, and a better grappling hook. The clerk, a man in his 60s with paint-stained hands, eyed their purchases with mild curiosity but didn't ask questions. Back at the cabin, Stephen was restless. He paced while Arthur organized the new equipment, checked his phone even though there was barely any signal, made coffee neither of them needed. "We should wait until morning," Arthur said. "Better light. It's only 3 o'clock. We've got hours of daylight left." Arthur recognized the urgency in his son's voice, the same edge he'd heard the day before. Whatever Stephen was searching, For in that well had nothing to do with an old box of letters, and everything to do with something broken inside himself. "All right," Arthur said, "let's go." At the well, Arthur secured the waterproof flashlight to the rope and lowered it carefully, watching it descend past the stone walls into darkness. The beam cut through the murky water at the bottom, illuminating sediment and stones. "And something else." "There," Stephen said, pointing. "On the left side, about 2 feet under the water." Arthur saw it. Another bundle, this one wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, wedged between 2 stones. He maneuvered the grappling hook until it caught, then pulled up slowly. Water streamed off the package as it emerged. This bundle was larger, heavier. They laid it on the tarp, and Stephen unwrapped it with careful hands. Inside was a cassette tape in a plastic case, remarkably well preserved, and another stack of letters. But it was the cassette tape that held their attention. Written on the label in the same careful handwriting was, "For whoever finds this, Geneva, October 1985. Stephen held it up to the light. "We need a cassette player." "There's one in the cabin," Arthur said. "Old boombox in the storage closet. Saw it when I was cleaning. Probably belonged to the previous owners. They practically ran back to the cabin." Arthur found the boombox on a shelf behind some canning jars, dusty but intact. He plugged it. The power company had come through early that morning, and the display lit up. Stephen inserted the cassette with trembling fingers and pressed play. Static, then the sound of someone clearing their throat, then a woman's voice, warm but tired, filled the small cabin. "I don't know why I'm doing this. Talking into a tape recorder like I'm someone important enough to document. But I've been writing letters to nobody for 2 years now, and I thought maybe hearing my own voice would make this feel more real. Make me feel more real." A pause. The sound of wind in the background. "It's October 1985. Lawrence left 3 months ago. No fight, no dramatic scene. I woke up one morning and he was gone. His truck was gone. Most of his clothes were gone. He left a note on the table that said, 'I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore.' That was it. 23 months of marriage reduced to 2 sentences. Stephen sat down heavily in one of the chairs. Arthur remained standing, one hand on the back of the other chair, listening. Geneva's voice continued, steady but edged with pain. "I should have seen it coming. The drinking got worse after we moved here. He'd go days barely speaking, then drive to town and come back smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. I tried talking to him, tried asking what was wrong. He'd say he was fine. He just needed time. He just needed space. How much space does one person need?" A long pause. The sound of something being set down. A mug, maybe. "The truth is, we were broken before we got here. We came to Vermont thinking a change of scenery would fix us, but you can't outrun your problems. Lawrence had demons I didn't know about. His father was an alcoholic. His childhood was hard in ways he never wanted to talk about. I thought love would be enough. I thought if I was patient, if I was understanding, if I was just there for him, he'd eventually let me in." Geneva's voice cracked slightly. "But he never did, and now he's gone, and I'm here alone in this cabin we built together, and I have to decide what to do next. Part of me wants to leave too, pack up and go back to Massachusetts, admit defeat, start over somewhere else. But another part of me, the stubborn part, wants to stay. This is my land too. I planted those apple trees. I built that garden fence. I survived 2 winters of learning how to keep the wood stove going and the pipes from freezing. Why should I leave?" Stephen wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Arthur pretended not to notice. "So I'm staying," Geneva said, her voice stronger now, "and I'm going to keep putting my story in the well. Maybe it's foolish. Maybe I'm just talking to myself. But there's something comforting about the idea. That someday someone might find these tapes and letters and know that I existed, that my life meant something, even if it didn't turn out the way I planned." Static, then her voice again, softer. "If you're listening to this, whoever you are, I hope you're doing better than I am right now. I hope you have people who love you and actually show up for you. And if you don't, If you're alone like me, I hope you find the strength to keep going anyway, because that's what we do, isn't it? We keep going, even when we don't know why." The tape clicked off. They sat in silence for a long moment, Geneva's words hanging in the air between them. Finally, Arthur spoke. "She stayed." "Yeah," Stephen said quietly. "She stayed. Takes courage to do that. Stay in a place full of painful memories." Stephen looked at his father, really looked at him, and Arthur saw understanding dawn in his son's eyes. Understanding that they were talking about more than Geneva now. "Is that why you bought this place?" Stephen asked. "To stay with the painful memories, instead of running from them?" Arthur considered the question. "Maybe. Or maybe to finally have a place where the memories can settle, where they can be what they are, without me having to pretend they're something else." Stephen nodded slowly. "I've been running. From Alison. From our house. From every place that reminds me of what we lost. I thought if I kept moving, kept busy, it wouldn't hurt as much." "Does it work?" "No." Stephen's voice was barely above a whisper. "It just means I'm hurting in different places." Arthur pulled out the chair and sat down across from his son. For once he knew exactly what to say. Then maybe it's time to stop running. Time to stay still long enough to figure out what comes next. Stephen met his father's eyes, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of shared pain, of parallel struggles, of two men trying to find solid ground after their lives had shifted beneath them. "Will you help me get the rest out of the well?" Stephen asked. "Every last piece," Arthur promised. Over the next 4 days, they established a rhythm. Mornings at the well, afternoons processing what they'd found, evenings listening to Geneva's voice fill the cabin with her story. They pulled up 3 more packages, each one carefully wrapped, deliberately placed at different depths. Geneva had been methodical, Arthur realized. She'd organized her archive like someone who understood it might be years, decades, before anyone found it. The second package contained letters spanning 1986 and 1987. Geneva's tone had shifted. The raw grief of Lawrence's departure had transformed into something else. Not quite acceptance, but a kind of determined resilience. Stephen read sections aloud while Arthur prepared their meals or tended the wood stove. June 1986. Mrs. Templeton came by with vegetable soup and fresh bread. "She's the only person in town who checks on me regularly. 84 years old, and still driving that ancient Buick down these rutted roads. She told me today that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. You can be surrounded by people and feel lonely," she said, "or you can be alone and feel whole." I'm trying to believe her. September 1986. The garden produced more than I can possibly eat. Tomatoes, squash, beans, carrots. I've been canning everything, filling the shelves in the root cellar. There's something satisfying about putting food by for winter. Like I'm having a conversation with my future self, taking care of her, making sure she'll be okay. March 1987. Boyd Kessler came to fix the leak in the roof. He's a good man, quiet like me, widowed 5 years ago. He didn't charge me much, said he was happy for the work. We had coffee after, sat at the kitchen table, not saying much of anything. It was nice. Not romantic, just comfortable. Like two people who understand what loss looks like. Arthur noticed how Stephen's voice softened when he read about Boyd. His son wanted Geneva to find happiness, wanted her story to have a gentler turn. But the fourth package complicated everything. It was wrapped in oilcloth like the others, but when they opened it they found something unexpected, a journal, not Geneva's handwriting. Heavier, more angular, less careful. The first page had a name written at the top, Lawrence Brennan. Stephen stared at the name for a long moment before looking up at Arthur. He came back? Or he left this before he went, Arthur suggested. Let's read it. The journal started in June 1983, overlapping with Geneva's early letters. Lawrence's first entry was dated just 3 months after they'd moved to Vermont. Stephen read it slowly, his voice uncertain. June 14th, 1983. Geneva doesn't know about the drinking. She suspects, but she doesn't know how bad it is. I've been hiding bottles in the shed, in the truck, anywhere she won't find them. I came here thinking the quiet would help, that getting away from the city would fix whatever's broken in me. But the quiet just makes it louder. All the things I don't want to think about, all the ways I've failed, they echo in the silence. Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. He'd known men like Lawrence, good men fighting demons they couldn't name. Stephen continued reading, working through entries that painted a different picture than Geneva's letters. Lawrence wrote about loving his wife deeply while feeling utterly incapable of being what she needed. He wrote about his father's violence, about growing up watching his mother make excuses for bruises, about promising himself he'd be different and then discovering the same rage living inside him. October 1983. I haven't hit her. I never would. But I can feel it in me sometimes, that anger my father had, and it terrifies me. So I drink to push it down, and I stay quiet because I'm afraid of what might come out if I start talking. Geneva deserves better than this. Better than me. Stephen's hands were shaking. He set the journal down and stood up, walking to the window. He loved her, Stephen said quietly. The whole time he loved her. Love doesn't fix everything, Arthur said. Sometimes it's not enough. Stephen turned around, his face tight with emotion. I loved Alison. I still do. But I didn't know how to. He stopped, struggling for words. I was there, but I wasn't there. Just like Lawrence. Just like he didn't finish, but Arthur heard it anyway. Just like you, Dad, just like you after Mom died. The truth of it sat heavy between them. You're right, Arthur said finally. I was there, but I wasn't there. You needed a father who could talk to you, who could help you process losing your mother. And instead, you got someone who just kept building things and putting meals on the table like that was enough. Stephen stared at him, clearly not expecting this admission. I didn't know how to do it differently, Arthur continued. My own father never talked about feelings. Men in my generation, we were taught to provide, to protect, to fix things. Nobody taught us how to sit with grief or help a 9-year-old boy understand why his mother was gone. I never blamed you, Stephen said. I know you did your best. My best wasn't good enough. And you grew up learning the same patterns. How to be present without really being present. How to care without knowing how to show it. Stephen sat back down at the table, picked up the journal again. Keep reading, he asked. Arthur nodded. The entries continued through 1984 and into early 1985. Lawrence wrote about small moments with Geneva, a shared meal, working together in the garden, a rare evening when they'd actually talked and laughed like they used to. But each bright moment was followed by darker ones. The drinking intensified. The silence grew. The final entry was dated July 1985. July 23rd, 1985. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Geneva doesn't know yet. I've tried a dozen times to tell her, but every time I open my mouth, nothing comes out. So I'll write her a note and be gone before she wakes up. It's cowardly, I know, but staying would be worse. I'm poisoning her life, pulling her down into my darkness. She talks about maybe starting a family, and the thought of bringing a child into me, terrifies me. I can't be a father. I can barely be a husband. The best thing I can do for her is leave. A paragraph break then. I'm putting this journal in the well because I don't want her to find it in the house. But maybe someday, if she ever checks the well, she'll understand. I didn't leave because I stopped loving her. I left because I loved her too much to keep destroying her. I hope she finds someone better. I hope she builds a good life here. I hope she forgets me. Stephen closed the journal carefully. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Arthur said, he thought he was protecting her. Was he? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe he was just scared and didn't know how to ask for help. Stephen looked at his father. Is that what happened with you? After Mom died? Were you protecting me by staying distant? Arthur considered the question honestly. I thought I was. I thought if I kept things stable and predictable, you'd feel safe. I didn't realize you needed more than safety. You needed connection. I did, Stephen said softly. But I also survived. We both did. Surviving isn't the same as thriving. No, Stephen agreed. It's not. The fifth package changed everything. They found it wedged deep in the well, below the waterline, protected by multiple layers of waterproof wrapping. When Stephen finally worked it free and they carried it back to the cabin, both of them were soaked and exhausted. Inside were more letters, but also photographs that made Arthur's breath catch. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of the cabin. Dark curly hair, gap-toothed smile, holding a fishing pole nearly as tall as she was. Stephen spread the photos across the table. There were dozens of them. The girl at different ages, 8, 9, 10. The girl with Geneva, both of them laughing. The girl climbing trees, reading on the porch, helping in the garden. She had a child, Stephen said, confused. But the letters never mentioned. He grabbed the new stack of correspondence and started reading. The first letter was dated June 1988, 3 years after Lawrence left. June 15th, 1988, Iris arrived yesterday. My sister Pauline died 2 weeks ago, cancer just like that, gone in 6 months, and Iris's father couldn't cope. He called me from Massachusetts saying he couldn't do it, couldn't raise her alone. Could I please take her for a while? A while, as if grief has a schedule. Stephen looked up at Arthur. Her niece. Geneva took in her niece. Arthur picked up one of the photographs, studying the girl's face. Something about her eyes looked familiar, but he couldn't place it. Stephen kept reading, his voice gaining strength. Iris is so quiet. She hasn't cried, hasn't asked about her mother. She just follows me around the cabin like a small shadow, watching everything I do. I don't know how to help her. I don't know how to be what she needs. But I remember what it felt like when Lawrence left, when I had to figure out how to keep living anyway. Maybe that's what Iris and I can do together, figure out how to keep living. Over the next hour, they read through Geneva's account of life with Iris, the letters transformed from chronicles of loneliness into something richer. Geneva wrote about teaching Iris to can vegetables, to identify trees, to read the weather. She wrote about Iris's nightmares and slow healing. She wrote about mistakes she made and small victories they shared. September 1989. Iris laughed today. Really laughed. Not the polite sound she makes when she thinks she should. We were trying to get the goat back in its pen, and we both ended up covered in mud, and she just started laughing. I started laughing too, and we stood there in the rain being ridiculous together. I haven't felt this happy in years. Stephen's voice cracked on the last sentence. He set down the letter and picked up another photograph. Geneva and Iris, both muddy, both grinning at the camera. She got a second chance, Stephen said. After everything with Lawrence, after being alone, she got to be a mother anyway. Arthur heard the longing in his son's voice. Stephen and Allison had tried for children. It hadn't happened, and eventually they'd stopped trying, stopped talking about it. Another silence that had grown between them. She didn't see it as a second chance at first, Arthur pointed out. She saw it as an obligation, something she wasn't sure she could handle. The grace came later, when she realized what they could give each other. Stephen nodded, reading more letters. Geneva's writing changed over the years, from uncertain to confident. She wrote about homeschooling Iris, about their routines, about the rhythms of their shared life. She wrote about Iris's questions, her grief, her gradual opening. March 1991. Iris asked about her mother today, really asked, not just the surface questions. She wanted to know what Pauline was like as a girl, what she loved, what scared her. I told her stories for 2 hours, pulling up memories I thought I'd forgotten. Afterward, Iris said, "I'm glad I'm here with you." It's the first time she said anything like that. I cried after she went to bed. Happy tears, grateful tears. There were school assignments tucked between the letters. A story Iris had written about a girl who lived in the forest. Math worksheets with gold stars. A drawing of the cabin with smoke coming from the chimney, and 2 stick figures holding hands in the yard. Arthur studied the drawing, feeling something shift in his chest. He thought about Stephen at that age, after Caroline died. The pictures Stephen had drawn in school, always of houses with just 2 people, never 3. The mother erased from the family portrait because the grief was too big to contain. "I didn't do this for you," Arthur said quietly. Stephen looked up from the letters. "What? After your mother died, I didn't do what Geneva did. I didn't help you talk about her. I didn't tell you stories about who she was. I just tried to keep us moving forward like nothing had happened. Dad, let me finish." Arthur set down the drawing. I was scared. Scared that if I opened that door, if I let us really feel how much we'd lost, we'd both fall apart and never recover. So I kept us busy, kept us scheduled, kept us from falling into the grief. You were grieving too, Stephen said. I was. But you were 9 years old, and you needed a parent who could hold space for your pain, not just his own. Geneva figured that out with Iris. I never did. Stephen was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table and took one of the photographs. I think you did better than you realize. I remember you coming to every school event, reading to me at night, even when you were exhausted, teaching me how to use tools, how to fix things. You showed up. But I never talked to you about her. About your mother. No, Stephen agreed. You didn't, and I needed that. But I also needed what you gave me. The stability, the routine, the sense that life would keep going, even when it felt impossible. Arthur met his son's eyes. We both could have done better. Yeah, Stephen said softly. We could have. But maybe that's the point of Geneva's story. Nobody does this perfectly. We're all just trying to figure it out, making mistakes. Hoping the love is enough, even when we don't know how to express it right. They sat with that truth for a while. The afternoon light slanting through the windows. Geneva's letters spread between them like a map of survival. Finally, Stephen picked up the last letter in the stack. It was dated June 1995. June 10th, 1995. Iris leaves for college in August. University of Vermont, studying environmental science. She wants to understand forests, ecosystems, how things grow and adapt. I'm so proud of her I could burst. But I'm also terrified. The cabin will be so quiet without her. These 7 years have been the happiest of my life. Who will I be when she's gone? Stephen stopped reading, staring at the page. There's more in the well, he said. There has to be. This isn't the end of her story. The 6th package was the deepest, wedged between stones at the very bottom of the well. It took Arthur and Stephen most of a morning to work it free, and when they finally hauled it up, they were both breathing hard. This package was different, heavier, wrapped in canvas and sealed with tape that had somehow survived decades of moisture. Inside was a single cassette tape in a plastic case, labeled in Geneva's handwriting, for Iris when she's ready, 1997. Stephen held it like something fragile and sacred. This one wasn't meant for us. No, Arthur agreed. But she's not here to listen to it. They walked back to the cabin in silence, both understanding they were about to cross a line. This wasn't a message to the world, to whoever might find it. This was personal, intended for one specific person. But that person was gone, and they'd come this far. Stephen put the tape in the player. For a long moment his finger hovered over the play button. Then he pressed it. Static, then Geneva's voice. Older now, thinner, with a weariness that hadn't been there before. My darling Iris, if you're listening to this, then you came back. You found the well like I hoped you would. I've been adding to it for years now, and I always imagined that someday you'd return to this place and discover everything I left for you. A pause. The sound of breathing. I'm recording this in March of 1997. You've been gone from the cabin for almost 2 years, building your life in Burlington, doing your research, becoming the woman I always knew you'd be. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. So incredibly proud. Stephen glanced at Arthur, both of them hearing something in Geneva's tone. Something final. I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer last October. Stage 4. By the time they found it, it had already spread. The doctors said I could try treatment, but the prognosis isn't good. A year, maybe 18 months if I'm lucky. Arthur felt the words land like stones. I haven't told you yet. I know I should have called you right away, but I didn't want to burden you with this. You've had enough grief in your life, losing your mother so young. You deserve to be happy, to focus on your studies, to build a life that isn't weighted down by death. Geneva's voice strengthened slightly. But I'm not afraid. I know that probably sounds strange, but it's true. I've had a good life, especially these last years with you. You gave me purpose when I thought I'd lost mine. You taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, about choosing to love someone even when it's hard. The sound of something being set down, then picked up again. I've been thinking a lot about Lawrence lately. about our marriage and why it failed. I was angry at him for so long, but I understand now. He was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. He thought leaving was the kindest thing he could do. I don't know if he was right or wrong. I just know that sometimes people make impossible choices with no good options. Stephen's jaw tightened. Arthur recognized the expression. His son was holding back tears. I'm leaving all of this, the letters, the tapes, Lawrence's journal, in the well, because I want you to know my whole story. Not just the happy parts from when you were here, but the hard parts too. The loneliness, the heartbreak, the learning how to live with disappointment. Because life is all of it, Iris. The beautiful and the broken woven together. Geneva's voice grew softer. I'm also leaving this land to someone I hope will appreciate it the way we did. Arthur Brennan, my nephew by marriage. Wesley's brother's son. I met Arthur once, years ago, at a family gathering. He seemed like a good man, solid and kind. I'm hoping that if he inherits this place, maybe you'll find your way back through that connection. Maybe the land will bring you home when you're ready. Arthur's breath stopped. Stephen turned to stare at him. Wait, Stephen said. She knew. Arthur's mind was racing. Wesley, Geneva's husband, was Wesley Brennan. My Uncle Wesley. Your uncle? My father's brother. He moved west in the 70s, married someone from Massachusetts. I met them once at a reunion in 1979. I never connected. The tape continued playing. Arthur, if you're hearing this, then the land came to you like I intended. I hope it brings you peace. I hope it gives you what it gave me. A place to heal, a place to remember, a place to figure out what comes next. And if you find these items in the well, I hope you'll try to find Iris. Tell her I loved her. Tell her she was my answer to everything. A long pause, the sound of Geneva breathing unevenly. Iris, my sweet girl, I need you to know something. When your mother died and you came to live with me, I was terrified. I thought I'd failed at everything. Marriage, happiness, building a life that mattered. I thought I had nothing left to give. But you taught me that it's never too late for grace. You taught me that love doesn't run out, it multiplies. Every story you told me, every question you asked, every time you laughed, you were giving me back my life. Geneva's voice broke. You were my second chance, Iris, my unexpected blessing. And these 7 years with you were the best years of my life. I got to watch you grow strong and curious and kind. I got to be your safe place when the world felt too hard. And now I get to let you go, knowing you'll be okay, knowing you'll build a beautiful life. The sound of paper rustling. I'm leaving you my wedding ring, not because I want you to remember the marriage that failed, but because I want you to remember that love is always worth trying for, even when it doesn't work out the way we hope. The ring is engraved W+G always. Wesley and I didn't stay together, but the love was real while it lasted. That matters. Another pause, longer this time. I'm getting tired now. The pain medication makes it hard to think clearly. But I want to end this by saying thank you. Thank you for coming into my life when I needed you most. Thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for teaching me that stories don't end. They echo forward into the future, touching people we'll never meet. Geneva's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Be happy, my darling girl. Live fully. Love deeply. And when you think of me, remember the good days. Remember the garden and the forest, and the two of us making a life together in this quiet corner of the world. Static. Then silence. Stephen reached forward and stopped the tape. His face was wet with tears. Arthur realized his own eyes were burning. She's gone, Stephen said. Geneva's been gone for almost 30 years. Arthur nodded, unable to speak. And Iris never knew. Never heard this. Never knew Geneva wanted to tell her about the cancer. We have to find her, Arthur said, his voice rough. We have to tell her. They spent the rest of that day in a kind of stunned silence, processing what they'd learned. Arthur kept thinking about his Uncle Wesley, trying to remember details from that single meeting in 1979. A tall man with kind eyes, he recalled. Quiet like Arthur himself. Geneva had been laughing that day, he remembered that much. She'd worn a yellow dress and had seemed genuinely happy. By evening, they'd made a plan. Find Iris, return Geneva's message to its intended recipient. Complete the circle Geneva had hoped would form. But finding someone after 30 years wasn't simple. Stephen started with the university where Iris had studied. He called the alumni office the next morning, explaining that he was trying to locate a former student on behalf of a deceased relative. The woman on the phone was sympathetic but firm. They couldn't give out personal information. "Can you at least tell me if she graduated?" Stephen asked. A pause, the sound of typing. "I can confirm that an Iris Brennan received a bachelor's degree in environmental science in 1999. That's all I can share." It was something. A confirmation that Iris had finished school, that she'd been real, that Geneva's story had continued beyond the tape. Arthur tried a different approach. He drove into town and visited the county clerk's office, searching through property records. If Iris had ever owned land in the area, there would be documentation. But after 2 hours of searching, he found nothing under the name Iris Brennan. Back at the cabin, Stephen was on his laptop, using the weak internet signal to search databases. Iris Brennan brought up dozens of results, none of them the right age or location. "What if she changed her name?" Stephen said. "She might have married. Or she might have taken her mother's maiden name after Geneva died." Pauline, Arthur remembered from the letters. Geneva's sister. What was her last name? Stephen flipped through the letters until he found a reference. Kensington. Iris's mother was Pauline Kensington before she married. He typed Iris Kensington, Vermont into the search engine. 3 results appeared. The third one made them both freeze. Dr. Iris Kensington, Senior Research Scientist, Vermont Forest Ecology Institute, Burlington, Vermont. Stephen clicked on the link. A university website loaded, showing a professional photograph. A woman in her mid-40s with dark curly hair just starting to grey. Geneva's eyes, wearing a field jacket and standing in front of a forest backdrop. "That's her," Arthur said. "That's Geneva's girl." The website listed her research interests: forest regeneration, climate adaptation in northeastern ecosystems, long-term ecological monitoring. There was a contact form, but no direct phone number or email address. Stephen read her biography aloud. Dr. Kensington received her PhD from Yale in 2005 and has spent the past 20 years studying forest dynamics in Vermont. She leads the Institute's long-term ecological research program and has published extensively on climate change impacts in temperate forests. No mention of family, no personal details beyond her academic credentials. "She's been here," Stephen said quietly. "This whole time she's been in Vermont. She came back, just like Geneva hoped." Arthur stared at the photograph, seeing Geneva in the shape of Iris's smile, in the directness of her gaze. This woman had been the little girl in those pictures, had grown up in the cabin where they were now sitting, had lost Geneva without ever hearing her final message. "We need to contact her carefully," Arthur said. "We can't just call and say, 'Your aunt left you messages in a well.' She'll think we're crazy." Stephen nodded. "We should write to her first. Explain who we are, how we found everything. Let her decide if she wants to hear it." They spent the next 2 hours crafting a letter. Arthur wrote it by hand. Something about this situation demanded the personal touch of handwriting rather than typed text. "Dear Dr. Kensington," he wrote, "my name is Arthur Brennan. I recently purchased property in northern Vermont that once belonged to my uncle Wesley Brennan and his wife Geneva. I believe Geneva was your aunt and guardian during your childhood." He explained about finding the well, about the letters and tapes, about Geneva's final message intended for Iris. He was careful to be respectful, to make it clear they weren't asking for anything, only hoping to return something precious that belonged to her. "Your aunt wanted you to hear her voice one more time," he wrote near the end. "She wanted you to know how much you meant to her and to understand why she made the choices she did. My son Stephen and I would be honored to share these items with you if you're willing to receive them." He included his phone number and the property address, then sealed the letter in an envelope. The next morning, Arthur drove into Burlington, an hour and a half through winding mountain roads. The Vermont Forest Ecology Institute was part of the university campus, a modern building with large windows overlooking a wooded hillside. Arthur didn't go inside. He couldn't risk a receptionist refusing to pass along the letter or throwing it away as too strange to be legitimate. Instead, he found Iris's name on the building directory, noted her office number, and slipped the envelope under her office door when the hallway was empty. Then he drove back to the cabin and waited. 2 days passed with no response. Arthur and Stephen occupied themselves by carefully cataloguing everything from the well. They made an inventory. 23 letters from Geneva spanning 1983 to 1995. Lawrence's journal covering 1983 to 1985. 3 cassette tapes, 47 photographs, Iris's childhood drawings and schoolwork, and Geneva's wedding ring wrapped in a piece of cloth at the bottom of the final package. They handled each item with reverence, understanding they were temporary guardians of someone else's history. On the 3rd day, Arthur's phone rang. Unknown number, Vermont area code. He answered, his heart pounding.
Hello?
Is this Arthur Brennan? A woman's voice, controlled but tight with emotion. It is. This is Iris Kensington. I received your letter. Arthur gestured urgently to Stephen, who came to stand beside him listening. Dr. Kensington, thank you for calling. Is this real? Her voice cracked slightly. The things you wrote about, the well, the tapes, is this real or some kind of cruel joke? It's real, every word. Your aunt left all of it for you to find. A long silence. Then so quietly Arthur almost didn't hear it. I thought I'd lost everything of hers. When she died, I was away at school. By the time I got the news and came back, someone had already cleared out the cabin. I never found any photos, any letters, nothing. It was like she'd been erased. She wasn't erased, Arthur said gently. She made sure you'd have her story. She just hid it somewhere safe until the right time. Another silence then. Can I come see it? See everything? Of course. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, Iris said immediately. I can be there tomorrow morning. Would that be too soon? No, Arthur said. Come tomorrow. We'll be here. He gave her directions, and they said goodbye. After he hung up, Arthur and Stephen looked at each other. She's coming, Stephen said. She's coming, Arthur agreed. They spent the rest of the day preparing. They arranged Geneva's items on the cabin table like a museum display. They cleaned the cabin thoroughly, made sure there was fresh coffee, tried to make the space welcoming for a woman who was about to confront her past. That night, neither of them slept much. Arthur lay in the loft, thinking about Geneva's hope that this land would somehow bring Iris home, thinking about the strange way Grace worked, how a warning note tucked in property papers had led 2 grieving men to discover a story that would heal a third person's heart. Morning came grey and cool, with mist rising from the forest. At 9:30 they heard a car engine in the distance. Iris was coming home. The car that emerged from the mist was a dusty green Subaru, practical and worn from years of fieldwork. It stopped beside Stephen's sedan, and for a long moment no one got out. Arthur and Stephen stood on the cabin porch, waiting, giving her time. Finally, the driver's door opened, and Iris Kensington stepped out. She was smaller than Arthur had imagined from her photograph, maybe 5'4", wearing jeans and a canvas jacket. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and even from a distance, Arthur could see Geneva in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself. She stood beside her car, staring at the cabin. Her hand came up to cover her mouth. "It's the same," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "The windows, the porch, even the shutter." She pointed to the crooked shutter Arthur hadn't gotten around to fixing yet. "That was broken when I lived here too." Arthur came down the porch steps slowly, Stephen following. "Dr. Kensington, Iris," she said quickly. "Please, just Iris." "Iris," Arthur repeated. "I'm Arthur. This is my son, Stephen." She nodded at them both, but her attention kept pulling back to the cabin, to the land around them. "I haven't been here in 27 years. I thought about it, thought about trying to find the property, but I was afraid. Afraid it would have been torn down or completely changed, or that coming back would make the grief fresh again." "We understand," Stephen said gently. Iris took a shaky breath. "Your letter said Geneva left things in the well." Her voice on tape. Is that true?" "It's true," Arthur confirmed. "Would you like to see?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. They led her into the cabin, and Iris stopped just inside the doorway. Her eyes swept the room, landing on details Arthur hadn't even noticed. A mark on the wall near the window, a knot in one of the floorboards, the way the light fell through the southern windows. "We read at that table," she said, pointing. "Every evening after dinner. Geneva would make tea, and we'd sit there and read together. Sometimes the same book, taking turns with chapters. Sometimes our own books, just being quiet together." She walked slowly to the table where they'd arranged everything. Her hand reached out, hovering over the items without touching them, as if afraid they might disappear. "These are her letters?" 23 of them, Stephen said. "Starting from 1983, before you arrived, through 1995. And this," Iris picked up the cassette tape labeled, "For Iris When She's Ready." Her hands trembled. "She recorded this for me?" "In 1997, Arthur said quietly. "She wanted you to hear it when the time was right." Iris set down the tape and picked up one of the photographs. Geneva and a young Iris, both covered in mud, laughing. "I remember this day. We were trying to catch the goat. She kept escaping, and we kept chasing her through the rain. We gave up eventually and just sat in the mud laughing like idiots." Her voice broke. "I'd forgotten about this." "How did I forget?" "Grief does that," Arthur said. "Makes memories harder to hold on to." She set down the photograph and picked up another, then another, working through the stack with tears streaming down her face. When she reached Iris's childhood drawings, she laughed through the crying. "I drew this house 1,000 times, always with smoke from the chimney, always with 2 people holding hands." She found Geneva's wedding ring wrapped in cloth, held it up to the light. The engraving was still visible, W+G always. "Wesley," she said. "Her first husband. She told me about him once. Said he was a good man who couldn't save himself, and that sometimes that happens. Sometimes people drown right in front of you, and there's nothing you can do." Arthur felt those words land deep. He glanced at Stephen, saw his son processing them too. Iris carefully set down the ring and turned to face them. "Can I listen to the tape? I know it might be hard, but I need to hear her voice." "Of course," Stephen said. He'd already set up the cassette player. "Take all the time you need. We can step outside." "No," Iris said quickly. "Please stay. I don't want to be alone for this." So they stayed, the 3 of them standing in the cabin, while Stephen pressed play and Geneva's voice filled the space. Arthur watched Iris's face as she listened to her aunt's final message, watched her absorb the news of the cancer, the decision not to tell her, the explanation of why, watched her cry when Geneva called her "my answer to everything." When the tape ended, Iris stood frozen for a long moment. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the forest. "She was sick for 6 months, Iris said, her voice hollow. 6 months she was here alone, dying, and I was in Burlington thinking everything was fine. She called me once a week like always. Never said a word about being sick. Never asked me to come home. She wanted you to live your life," Arthur said. "She said so in the tape." "I know what she said." Iris turned around, her face fierce. "But I would have come. I would have been here. She shouldn't have died alone." "She made that choice out of love," Stephen offered quietly. "The same way Lawrence made his choice out of love. They were both trying to protect the people they cared about, even if the protection wasn't what those people needed." Iris stared at him, and Arthur saw understanding dawn in her eyes. She heard what Stephen wasn't saying, that he knew something about being protected when what you needed was presence. "Did you read all the letters?" she asked. "We did," Arthur admitted. "We know we shouldn't have, that they were private, but—" "I'm glad you did," Iris interrupted. "I'm glad someone witnessed her story. All these years, I thought she'd been forgotten, that her life hadn't mattered to anyone but me. But she mattered enough to leave all this. She mattered enough for you to find me." She returned to the table, running her fingers over the items arranged there. "There's something I need to tell you. Something Geneva never knew, because she died before I could share it." Arthur and Stephen waited. "In my last year of college, I started researching this property. The history of the land, the ecology, how it had been used over the decades. I wrote my senior thesis about it, about how this small piece of forest had survived farming, logging, human habitation, and still maintained its essential character. Our resilience looks like in ecosystems. She picked up one of Geneva's letters. But I was really writing about Geneva, about how she survived Lawrence leaving, about how she created a life here that sustained her, about how she took in a broken child and made her whole again. I just couldn't say that in an academic paper. Iris looked at both of them. I've spent my entire career studying forests, but what I'm really studying is what Geneva taught me, that life adapts, that broken things can heal, that there's grace in the most unexpected places. Iris asked if they could walk to the well together, and Arthur led the way through the forest, following the path of stones he and Stephen had cleared weeks ago. The morning mist was lifting, sunlight breaking through the canopy and slanted beams that made the wet leaves shimmer like scattered coins. When they reached the clearing, Iris stopped and drew in a sharp breath. Her hand came up to touch her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "I'd forgotten it was here," she finally said. "Or maybe I blocked it out. Memory does strange things when you're trying to survive grief." She approached the ancient stone structure slowly, the way someone might approach a grave they hadn't visited in years. Kneeling beside it, she pulled away some of the moss Arthur and Stephen had left in place, revealing the craftsmanship beneath, stones fitted together with skill and patience by hands long gone. "Geneva used to tell me never to play near it, that it was dangerous. I always listened because—" She paused, running her fingers along the cold stone. "Because I didn't want to disappoint her. She'd lost so much already. I couldn't bear the thought of causing her more worry." "She was protecting you," Arthur said. "Protecting what she'd hidden here, making sure you wouldn't find it until the time was right." Iris nodded, leaning forward to peer down into the darkness. The protective grate they'd installed caught the light. All those years, her story was right here, waiting for me to be ready to hear it. She looked up at them. "How did you know to keep looking?" "Most people would have found the first box and stopped," Stephen answered. "Because every time we found something, it felt unfinished. Like Geneva was telling us there was more, leading us deeper." "That sounds like her," Iris said softly. "She never did anything halfway. When she committed to something, to the land, to Lawrence despite his struggles, to raising me, she gave it everything." She stood and turned to face them, wiping her eyes, but not trying to hide that she'd been crying. "I need to tell you the rest of what happened. About after Geneva died, and why this place became a ghost I couldn't face." They settled on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, and Iris told them about September 1997, how a neighbor, Mrs. Templeton's daughter, had called her at university saying Geneva had been found in the cabin. "Peaceful," the woman had said. "In her sleep, no suffering." But by the time Iris made the 3-hour drive from Burlington, everything had already begun moving, according to processes she didn't understand. The county had taken jurisdiction because Geneva had no immediate next of kin listed in her will. The cabin's contents had been catalogued by someone who didn't know their significance. Furniture donated to charity, papers filed in boxes at the county clerk's office, personal items, and Iris's voice broke here, thrown away or lost in the shuffle of bureaucratic efficiency. "I tried to find something of hers," Iris said. "Anything. A photograph, a letter, one of her sweaters that still smelled like her. But it was all gone. Someone told me the lawyer handling the estate had boxed up some papers, but they couldn't find his contact information. The land itself was being transferred to an heir named Arthur Brennan, but nobody seemed to know how to reach him." Arthur felt a wave of regret. "I moved 3 times between 1997 and when I finally got the notice about the property. The lawyer's letters kept getting forwarded, lost, delayed. By the time I understood what I'd inherited, it had been almost 30 years. I drove back to Burlington that day, thinking I'd lost her twice," Iris continued. "Once when she died, and again when every trace of our life together disappeared. I couldn't even visit her grave. She'd been cremated and her ashes scattered in the forest somewhere. Mrs. Templeton said Geneva had wanted that, wanted to become part of the land she loved." "Why did you change your name?" Stephen asked gently. Iris was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. After Geneva died, I couldn't bear being Iris Brennan anymore. Every time someone said my name, I heard Geneva's voice calling me in for dinner, or telling me to bundle up before going outside, or reading my name on school assignments she'd graded. It hurt too much. My mother's maiden name was Kensington, so I reclaimed it legally. I thought it would help me move forward, create some distance from the grief. Did it work? Arthur asked. No, Iris admitted. You can't outrun grief by changing your name any more than you can outrun it by changing locations or jobs or relationships. It follows you because it's part of you. It took me years to understand that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry differently. Arthur thought about his own attempts to outrun grief. The long hours on construction sites after Caroline died. The emotional distance he'd maintained with Stephen, thinking it would protect them both from further pain. The way he'd bought this land, hoping isolation would somehow equal peace, only to discover that peace required connection, not separation. Geneva knew you'd come back eventually, he said. That's why she left the land to family. She was creating a path for you to find your way home, even if it took 30 years. Iris looked at him with Geneva's eyes. That same direct, honest gaze that saw through pretense to the truth beneath. And you found it first. Both of you, she glanced between Arthur and Stephen. Your letter mentioned you were father and son dealing with your own losses. Can I ask, why were you really looking for the well? What made you keep searching when you could have just ignored that strange warning? Stephen and Arthur exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing between them in silence. Then Stephen spoke, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Because I needed to hear someone else's story about surviving loss. About staying when everything in you wants to run. About finding out that the people we love are carrying pain we can't see. And that sometimes love means sitting with that pain instead of trying to fix it or run from it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Geneva's story, Lawrence's story, they helped me understand my own life better. My marriage fell apart because I was there, but not really present, just like Lawrence. And I learned that pattern from my father, who was there but emotionally absent after my mother died. Not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't know any other way to survive. Stephen looked at Arthur. Finding the well, reading those letters, hearing Geneva's voice, it gave us a language for talking about things we'd never been able to discuss. It showed us that other people have struggled with the same questions, made the same mistakes, and found ways forward anyway. Iris nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. She would have liked that. Geneva always said stories were medicine, that they connected us across time and distance, helped us feel less alone with our struggles. She pulled a folded paper from her jacket pocket, the edges worn as if it had been handled many times. I brought something too. I didn't know if it would be appropriate to share, but after hearing Geneva's tape, I think maybe it is. She unfolded the paper carefully, revealing handwriting that matched the careful precision of her academic work. This is a letter I wrote to Geneva 5 years after she died. I was in therapy, trying to process everything. Her death, my childhood losses, the way I'd built walls around my heart to protect myself from more pain. My therapist suggested I write Geneva one more time, tell her what I needed to say, but never got the chance to. Iris read aloud, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Dear Geneva, I understand now why you didn't tell me about being sick. You were giving me permission to keep living, to not let grief define my whole life the way it had defined yours for so long after Lawrence left. But I want you to know that loving you, being loved by you, that defined my life in the best possible way. You taught me that family is a choice we make every day, that showing up matters more than being perfect, that there's always room for one more chance at grace, even when we think we've used them all up. She paused, then continued. I wish I'd been there at the end. I wish I'd had the chance to hold your hand and tell you thank you for saving my life when I was too young to know it needed saving. But I'm trying to honor your memory by living the way you taught me, with courage, with openness to unexpected joy, with faith that broken things can heal if we give them time and tend them carefully. Iris folded the letter again. I'd like to add this to the well, if that's okay, along with my response to her final tape. Keep the conversation going across time. I think that's exactly what Geneva would want, Arthur said. 3 months passed like water finding its level, slowly, naturally, settling into new patterns that felt both foreign and deeply right. Arthur stood at the kitchen window on a Saturday morning in early December, watching the first significant snow of the season dust the forest in silence. The world outside looked clean and new, every branch weighted with white, every sound muffled by the accumulation. The cabin was warmer now than it had been when he'd first arrived in September. Properly insulated, with the electricity running reliably and a new propane heater supplementing the wood stove. The crooked shutter had finally been fixed, along with a dozen other small repairs that made the place feel less like a shelter and more like a home. Stephen had helped with most of the work during his weekly visits, which had stretched from quick weekends to sometimes 3 or 4 days at a time. His son had negotiated a remote work arrangement with his insurance company after the divorce was finalized, splitting his time between a small apartment in Boston and the cabin's loft. The divorce papers had been signed in October. Sad but clean, Stephen said. Both he and Allison had finally been honest about what hadn't worked, about the ways they'd failed each other not through malice, but through silence and emotional absence. It's the family curse, Stephen had joked darkly one night over whiskey, though there'd been truth beneath the humor. We Brennan men were great at showing up physically but terrible at being emotionally present. Arthur had corrected gently. Was the family curse? Past tense. We're learning different, and they were learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to actually talk to each other. How to say, I'm struggling, or I need help, or I'm proud of you, without the words catching in their throats. It didn't come naturally to either of them, this emotional vocabulary they'd never been taught, but Geneva's letters had given them a template. If she could be that honest, that vulnerable on paper, surely they could manage it face to face. Dad, Iris just texted, Stephen called down from the loft now, interrupting Arthur's thoughts. She'll be here in 20 minutes. You want me to make more coffee?
I've got it, Arthur called back, filling the kettle.
You finish whatever you're working on. They'd fallen into an easy routine of Saturday morning meetings over the past month. The 3 of them gathered around the kitchen table, planning the conservation project Iris had proposed. She'd secured a small grant from the Vermont Community Foundation to establish what she was calling the Geneva Brennan Memorial Research Site, focused on long-term forest ecology studies. The paperwork was nearly complete, and come spring, Iris would bring graduate students to establish permanent monitoring plots across the property. But today was different. Today, they were installing something permanent, something that would mark this place's significance for anyone who came after them. The memorial stone had arrived yesterday afternoon, delivered by the mason from town, who'd spent the last 2 weeks crafting it according to Iris's careful specifications. Arthur had hired him to do the engraving work, and the result had been wrapped and loaded in Iris's Subaru before Arthur could see the final design. She'd wanted it to be a surprise, a gift to the land and to Geneva's memory. Arthur heard the familiar sound of Iris's vehicle coming up the drive, engine straining slightly in the fresh snow. He pulled on his jacket and boots and stepped out onto the porch, just as Stephen came down from the loft, already dressed for the cold. Iris's Subaru came to a stop beside Stephen's sedan, both vehicles now wearing several inches of snow on their hoods. She climbed out wearing her field jacket and wool hat, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Despite the cold, she was smiling. "Perfect day for this," she called. "The snow makes it feel ceremonial." Together, the 3 of them approached the back of her vehicle, where the stone lay wrapped in a canvas top, secured with bungee cords. Arthur could see its outline, roughly 3 feet tall, maybe 18 inches wide, substantial enough to last generations. "Before we move it," Iris said, her hand resting on the covered stone, "I want to say something. When Geneva died, I thought that was the end of her story. I thought she'd be forgotten, except in my memory, and when I died, she'd be gone completely. But you two," she gestured at Arthur and Stephen, "you found her. You witnessed her life, honored her story, brought me back to this place I thought I'd lost forever. You gave her a kind of immortality I never imagined possible." Her voice thickened with emotion. "So this stone isn't just a memorial, it's a promise. A promise that what happened here, all the love and loss and learning and grace, will be remembered and honored for as long as this forest stands." She pulled back the top. The stone was beautiful, dark grey granite with a slightly rough texture that would weather well over decades. The lettering had been carved deep and filled with black, ensuring legibility even as weather wore at the surface. The main inscription read, "Geneva Brennan, 1952-1997, who taught us that stories echo forward." Below that, in smaller letters, "And for Lawrence Wesley and Pauline, may all who were lost find peace," at the very bottom. A final line, "This land is protected in perpetuity as a place of healing and remembrance." Arthur felt his throat tighten. Iris had included everyone in Geneva's story. Not just Geneva herself, but Lawrence, who'd struggled and left, Wesley, who'd died too young, Pauline, who'd been taken by cancer. Even those who'd made mistakes, even those who'd disappeared, were remembered and honored. No one was written out of the narrative. "It's perfect," Stephen said quietly, and Arthur could only nod his agreement. They carried the stone together, walking carefully through the snow along the path that was becoming well-worn from their frequent trips between cabin and well. The morning was absolutely still. No wind, just the soft sound of their boots crunching through the white blanket. At the well, a concrete pad had been poured the previous week when the weather had still been above freezing. The mason had promised to come Monday to permanently set the stone, but for now they positioned it carefully in the center of the pad and stepped back to see how it looked. The well itself had been made safe over the past months. A custom-fitted grate now covered the opening, heavy enough that it couldn't be accidentally dislodged, but removable for adding items. The stone walls had been stabilized and reinforced where they'd started to collapse, but the essential character remained. This was still the well Geneva had chosen as her confidant, her archive, her way of speaking to the future. "I brought something else," Iris said, pulling a small waterproof container from her backpack. "Photographs from my career. Pictures of forests I've studied. Research sites I've established across Vermont and New England. Graduate students I've mentored who are doing important work now. Geneva wanted to know I'd built a good life, that I'd found purpose and meaning. I thought she should see proof." She knelt beside the well, removed the grate carefully, and lowered the container on a length of cord until it reached the bottom, then replaced the protective covering. "There's one more thing I need to tell you both," she said, standing and brushing snow from her knees. "I've been working with my lawyer on the conservation easement we discussed. The paperwork is ready to file." She pulled a document from her jacket's inner pocket, protected in a plastic sleeve. "This creates a permanent conservation restriction on the property. The land stays in your family, Arthur, passes to Stephen and then to his descendants. But it can never be developed, never be logged commercially, never be sold for anything except continued conservation purposes. It would always remain forest, always be available as a research site, always be a place where people can come to heal. For future generations," Arthur said, understanding the full weight of what she was proposing. "Exactly. Geneva's story echoes forward, but so does the land itself. We're creating something that will outlast all of us." Iris looked between them. "But it requires your signature, Arthur, as the legal owner. I won't pressure you. This is a significant decision that affects your family's rights to the property." Arthur didn't need to think about it. He'd known since the moment they'd found Geneva's first letter that this land was never really his to own. He was just a temporary guardian of something much larger than himself. "Where do I sign?" They returned to the cabin, and Arthur signed the conservation easement at the same table where they'd read Geneva's letters months ago. Stephen witnessed the signature, and Iris notarized it with the stamp she'd brought for the purpose. Just like that, the land's future was secured. Over fresh coffee, Iris showed them her detailed plans for the spring research season. She'd be bringing 3 graduate students to establish permanent monitoring plots, to document every tree species and their health, to begin understanding how this particular piece of forest had adapted to change over the decades. "My granddaughter might visit this summer," Arthur mentioned, the thought having come to him during the past week. Stephen's daughter from his first marriage. She's 14 now, asking questions about everything, especially interested in environmental science. Her mother's been encouraging it. Iris's face lit up with genuine excitement. "I'd love to meet her. She could help with some of the fieldwork if she's interested. We always need extra hands, and teenagers often see things we miss because they're not carrying preconceptions about how forests should look." Stephen smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Arthur had seen settle on his son's face in months. "She'd love that. She's always asking me why I don't do something more meaningful with my life. Maybe watching you work would inspire her." "She sounds like someone Geneva would have adored," Iris said softly, clearly thinking of her younger self, of the curious child Geneva had nurtured into a scientist. As afternoon faded toward evening, Arthur looked around the cabin at these 2 people who'd become essential to his life in such a short time. Stephen, slowly rebuilding himself after the collapse of his marriage, learning to be present instead of just physically available. Iris, honoring Geneva's memory not with grief, but with purposeful action, creating meaning from loss. And himself, no longer running from the past, but learning to live alongside it, to let the painful memories exist without letting them define everything. Geneva had been right, he thought. Stories didn't end. They echoed forward through time, touching people they were never meant to reach, creating connections that healed in ways no one could predict or control. She'd put her story in a well-thinking maybe someday someone would care enough to listen. Instead, she'd created a bridge across 3 decades, bringing together 3 broken people who needed each other in ways they couldn't have imagined. Outside, snow continued to fall in the gathering darkness, covering the forest in quiet white. The memorial stone stood at the well now, marking sacred ground. Inside the cabin, light glowed warm through the windows, and the sound of conversation and occasional laughter drifted out into the winter night. Some places held more than earth and water, Arthur thought, as he stood at the window, watching night settle over the land. Some places held the accumulated weight of human love and loss and resilience. Some places held grace, offered freely to whoever was willing to stop running long enough to receive it. This was one of those places, and he was home,